Welcome to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, courageously expanding love with me, Elizabeth Cunningham. Has the way that love has arisen in you seemed out of place or even taboo? My mission is to expand the conversation of love in the world. Is it possible to have deep, loving, healthy relationships? Have you ever been curious about having more than one relationship or partner at a time? Get ready to transform in love, be courageous, and set yourself free. In this show, we talk about relationships, sex, love, and the ways we wish we could be, but never thought were possible. I shed light on things that are not always talked about with conversations about expanding love. The Elizabeth Cunningham Show starts now. Welcome to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show. My name is Elizabeth Cunningham, and I am excited to bring you our show today from different parts of the world. And I'm going to introduce my guest here in a second. But I am currently in Nebraska at my parents' home. So for those of you who are watching that notice my different surroundings, here I am. And today we are going to be talking about solo polyamory and critically challenging hierarchy with Roy Graff. Roy is a mentor and a coach who specializes in helping individuals, couples, and polycules navigate polyamory and conscious relating. His work as a relationship coach is informed by psychosynthesis psychotherapy training, radical honesty and nonviolent communication practices, as well as 11 years of practicing polyamory in various dynamics. He has been giving talks and facilitating workshops in polyamory, positive masculinity, kink, and consent since 2015. And his educational activities on his website and Instagram focus on adopting an abundance mindset in relationships. Roy, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And just so people know, where are you calling in from?
Well, it's late night here in London, UK.
Yes, awesome. So we've got it all around the world today. I love it. Yeah. Well, the topic today is solo polyamory and critically challenging hierarchy. And so I'm really excited to dive in. And, I really like to start at the ground level on the show, which is like, okay, what are we actually talking about? So, in your words, what is solo polyamory?
Well, for me, solo polyamory means that I have a primary relationship with myself and that I build and construct relationships around me with people that I care about, that I value their time and their energy, but there isn't necessarily a particular hierarchy amongst them. And I also choose to live alone and have control over the time that I spend with different partners. Now, I could have one partner, I could be single. The premise is that I value my alone time and I value also my friendships, and I don't want to elevate one relationship over all the others.
Okay.
So
And that
in
kind of
that sense,
goes, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, in that sense, it goes along with um, relationship anarchy principles. I don't know if you've covered that in your show before, but
We've hit on it a little bit, but I
Mhm.
haven't specifically had a show about it.
Yeah, and that might be a nice kind of idea for a future. But essentially,
Definitely.
relationship anarchy posits that no relationship is inherently more valuable or more important than others just because of the way it looks or what you do in that relationship, or whether you have sex or whether you have romance. The only thing that's important is that you is the value that two people in a relationship put into that relationship and hold and the regard they give it.
Right.
And in that sense, family relations, friendships, um, romantic relationships, sexual relationships, they can have different values to you, and it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you're say in a romantic or sexual relationship somehow that has to mean that that connection is more important. And
Right.
it's a radical shift in thinking because we've been conditioned from a very early age to expect this relationship escalator idea of like of basically to be happy, to be complete, I must meet one person, fall in love with them, build a life with them, have kids, live together, own a home, kind of blend our finances. All of those things are told to us. This is the way, right? This is like the holy path. And
Hmm.
you know what? It doesn't fit. It doesn't work for everybody, and we're all different. So it's total makes total sense that it doesn't work for everybody. But people
Right.
who don't achieve that or found that it or find that it doesn't work for them begin to feel like a failure because society tells them this is the way. This is what success looks like in relationships. And if you're a failure, you start to experience guilt or shame. Um, you start to doubt your own self confidence. A lot of things happen. And the same can be true for people who are, say, queer in a world where hetero relationships are the norm and the standard, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that that is kind of the concept that I know most about solo polyamory and relationship anarchy is this, disentanglement of like the more or less value that different relationships have,
Hmm.
right? And so my then next question is, because I think that a critic of that might say, well, aren't you just stuck in kind of like just dating around or like being single? Haven't you just chosen,
Hmm.
what's the difference between solo
Yeah.
polyamory and just choosing to be single for the rest of your life?
Yeah, and I get asked that. I get asked that on dating sites sometimes when I put it in my profile, and they're like, "Well, what does that mean? You're just single, you're just dating, or you're not ready to commit." And I guess my answer to that is that first, I've experienced monogamy, I've experienced being married, I've experienced being polyamorous in a primary relationship. I've tried different kind of relationship dynamics, and this is what works best for me in the moment now, and has been for the last 4 years. Now, that doesn't mean that in the future I may not change the way I live or what kind of dynamic I'm looking to build, but it has nothing to do with commitment or with attachment or with going deep in a relationship. I'm very committed to my partners. We have a very deep and intimate relationship, and it's as loving and as committed as any other, monogamous or primary relationship. That doesn't really have anything to do with it. So, I mean, personally, I enjoy dating and I enjoy meeting new people and discovering new things about people. But I also really value the kind of the feeling of intimacy that you can build in a long term relationship, and that's really important to me. And I'm quite a romantic person, so I also really love to fall in love.
That's really beautiful. So how would you define commitment in your relationships?
So when people think about commitment, let's say in the kind of traditional monogamous relationships, they think about making promises, right? Or having contracts, like marriage is a legal contract. Buying a house together is a contract. Um, or making promises. I will love you forever. I will be with you forever. I'll be with you through sickness and health. All of that stuff. Now, all these promises don't really mean much because we can't. There's no guarantee that we can actually deliver on them. So they're promises that I'm sure made in good faith, and people mean it when they say it. But if you really think about it, realistically, you can't make these promises, right?
Hmm.
And the high divorce rate and the breakup rate amongst monogamous people is kind of bears that out. So I don't like to think of commitment as something that I basically um, essentially outsource to institutions like the state that manages kind of marriage licenses.
Hmm.
I like to think of commitment as something that that is real, that is realistic, that is achievable,
Hmm.
and it's really about the emotional connection, right? So I'm
Hmm.
committed um, to um, to be truthful, to be honest, to be direct, to say what I want, to ask for what I want, um, and to be generous and compassionate with my partner when they ask me for what they want. I think that's commitment. And then there's the way, the relationships are built of making plans together, to go on holiday, to go see friends, to go out. All of that is part of commitment as well, right? Because you're involving another partner in your daily life. You care about what's going on in their life, right? You basically share that information. All of that creates part of a commitment.
Yeah, and I think that links beautifully to what you created earlier with what how you define solo polyamory, is that then you can create those commitments in all of your relationships, right? Like it's not just romantic relationships, but it's also friendships or family or even
Yeah.
like working relationships too, where it's like I'm committed to respecting you for as long as our relationship lasts, whatever that may look like. I'm committed to listening to you. I'm committed to making sure that you're happy, whether or not that I'm in a relationship with you or not. Like that's one of my commitments for my partnerships or my relationships, is like I'm committed that you're happy, and that doesn't have to have me be involved in that. I'm just committed that you're happy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the most important revelations for me on this journey was this idea that um, I have a right to pleasure, I have a right to happiness, but also I am the only person that is really responsible for my happiness and my pleasure. Nobody else is responsible for it. People might want to help me be happy. People might want
Right.
to give me pleasure. I might want to give other people pleasure. But nobody is responsible for my pleasure. And I'm not responsible for anybody else's pleasure or happiness, right? But
Right.
I choose, again, but one of these commitments are me making a conscious choice um, out of a desire
Mm-hmm.
to help other people, my partners, my friends, be happy or have
Right.
pleasure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, thank you for kind of dissecting that distinction. I think that that's really important.
Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so I have kind of a bigger question to ask you. I'm going to ask it, and then we're going to go on break here. So it's going to be a little bit of a teaser. What I want to ask you is, how does choosing solo polyamory challenge the default narrative of romantic relationships? And like we've already answered that a little bit, but I also want to talk about the difficulties that
Mhm.
people face in creating, since you are challenging the narrative around romantic relationships, what are some of the challenges that people who are, practicing solo polyamory, what they face? So we're actually going to go on break. But when we come back, that is what we're going to be talking about. How are you challenging the narrative, and what are the challenges? Oh, there you go. I'll just use all the same words over and over and over again.
Okay, well, I've got some time for in the break to come up with a good answer to that.
Okay, perfect. All right, for those of you who are watching or listening right now, please stick around, and we are going to be right back with Roy Graff. Welcome back to our second segment of the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding Love. And we are here talking to Roy Graff about solo polyamory and critically challenging hierarchies. So, where we left off, the question that we cliffhanged, is that how you say that? Cliffhangered, whatever. I'm not about the English today. This is going to be the episode where Elizabeth doesn't speak English. That's what we're doing today. But Roy has been doing an excellent job of answering all my questions so eloquently. So thank you, Roy, for making up for my
Mhm.
lack of English. All right. So where we left off was the question of how does choosing solo polyamory challenge the default narrative around romantic relationships, and what are some of the difficulties that people face in challenging that narrative and choosing solo polyamory?
Okay, well, starting off, I don't think it was really a choice for me as much as it was a natural progression. Um, as I mentioned, I've tried different kinds of different dynamics and different forms of non-monogamy once I discovered non-monogamy,
Mhm.
starting with an open relationship and then a primary relationship with a nesting partner and having other more secondary and more casual relationships. And I got to this point of realizing in that relationship that I didn't want to have a primary. I didn't want to label relationships as one thing. Um, I wanted to be much more organic and allow those relationships to just happen, to just kind of grow and go with an ebb and flow and be whatever they need to be. And I thought that like when I'm say living with somebody and calling that a primary, then already we're kind of like essentially replicating the model in a way, or following the model of the established narrative, of mononormativity, of basically you live together, therefore you must plan all your holidays together. You must consider each other in everything else you're planning, including other dates and other things, because you live together, right? And you want to know when your partner is home. Now all those things are never questioned. These ideas of like, when there's a couple, then all of a sudden their life becomes one. And whatever I do always impacts on the other person, even if it's something that I'm just doing for myself, with my body, my time, my energy. And that really rubbed me the wrong way. And I couldn't really, because I grew up in monogamy, it took me a while to figure out that that's what was wrong, that that's what I wasn't really happy about. Because to have the right boundaries that protect who I am in my core, myself, I need to really know what they are. I need to establish that I know what I want and what I value. And because I just kind of went along with what I guess was expected or what most people did, I never questioned it. So as I became much more open to questioning things critically, to challenging the ongoing narrative, I also came into knowing what is right for me, what are actually my values. And for me, a very, very big value is freedom and autonomy and agency for myself and for my partners. I'm fiercely also um, determined to protect my partner's agency and their autonomy, not just my own. So solo polyamory became really the thing that fit best. Now, um, when you mentioned like challenging the ongoing kind of mononormativity or the ongoing narrative of traditional relationships, a lot of it is about people's expectations, right? So sometimes when I say that I don't have a hierarchy, people would ask me, people who are say monogamous or even polyamorous but in primary relationships, there's a common question which is, oh, but if you had to, who would you choose, right?
For
And
those of
then
you listening, you missed my eye roll. Okay.
it was a good eye roll.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really, like, why do I need to choose? Like, the again, there's this like idea or a myth that we have to choose one person over others, right? And actually, do you have to choose one friend, only one friend? Do you have to choose one parent or one child? No. So similarly, I don't feel I need to even that question doesn't need to come up. Um,
Right. Well, when you break it down like that, it does kind of fall apart. It's like, yeah, that
all of it
does
falls
that
apart.
is
Yeah.
actually kind of silly, isn't it? To like have to choose one
Mhm.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, but the thing is, society around us still makes us choose. For example, I mean, I work for myself, but if I worked in a company and there was an office party, there'll be, yeah, you get a plus one,
Right.
right? What do I do? If I'm invited to a wedding, you get a plus one. Yeah.
Right.
So, um, those things are outside of my control, but I don't like them. And
Mm.
normally, if that happened, I may invite one partner and then another one. Maybe it also depends on who's available. Or I would ask if it's a friend's wedding, I might say, hey, maybe I can bring both partners, or maybe I just want to come alone and not have to bring a plus one because I'm solo polyamorous and I'm very happy being on my own as well. So there are some challenges in people's expectations around you, and of course when it comes to the law, there's lots of other things around the primacy of the dyad relationship, of the couple centric kind of legal structure and social structure, right? And I think that kind of brings us very kind of conveniently into the idea of challenging the primacy of hierarchy in relationships, of just the couple dynamic. So
Mhm.
solo polyamory, I think, very forcefully challenges that. But even people, but people who maybe want to have a triad relationship or any kind of polycule, maybe even living together with multiple partners, or people that again choose to be single or choose to be solo polyamorous and live alone, they are penalized, penalized by the tax code, by rents, by lease agreements that often favor married couples, for example, over just friends renting. And of course, a lot of things are much more expensive if you want to buy them either as one or as three, because a lot of things are packaged up for two, you know?
Right.
Um, you get holidays, which are like, basically everything is based on the couple. Most of the hotel rooms are for couples, for two people. So pretty much all the beds are designed for two people. So there's a lot of these things all around us, and once you start looking at it critically, my God, it never ends. There's so much.
Yeah, and I think that that's also what people miss, or like, because it doesn't often come to mind, right?
Yeah.
Because we think of people as either you're single or you're in a couple. Like that's the majority of our world. You're single or
Mhm.
you're in a couple. And so then it would make sense that all of the structures around us are then, set up in that way as well. So as far as like the difficulties that people face. So there's like the difficulties that people face just in day-to-day life, and kind of what you were saying, and like just generally living. But what are some of the challenges that people in solo polyamory face, like in creating
Hmm.
relationships?
Yeah. So I think that there's an expectation in oftentimes for people who maybe again grew up in a monogamous kind of mindset that somehow your relationship kind of defines your value in some way. So feeling special, feeling unique, feeling like you have something exclusive is what gives you value. Yeah.
I've absolutely heard that from people where they're like, I'm not going to be whole until I have,
Yeah.
my lifelong
Yeah.
partner. I'm not going to be happy, or I'm not going to be fulfilled, or I'm not going to. I've even had women say, like, I'm not going to feel beautiful until I have my lifelong partner.
Yeah.
And yeah, solo polyamory absolutely like flies in the face of like, no, actually, you can be happy and fulfilled and absolutely beautiful.
And you need to know that for yourself, and it's important
Yeah.
that you have that kind of self-love and self-confidence to be very happy on your own, because even if you have multiple partners, they also have partners, and sometimes nobody's available to be with you, and maybe even your friends are busy. Like, it's okay. I mean, I enjoy being on my own, and that's an important part of why I live this way and why I choose to live alone, is that I have alone time for myself. Now, but out of that need for validation and somehow to feel like somehow you own a piece of your partner, that kind of what makes you feel special. That's often why even in people who are open and exploring polyamory, they want to hold on to this label of primary. It's like, yes, you can love other people, but we have this one unique thing or one exclusive thing that nobody else can have, right? So that's still in a way, and I'm not saying it's like bad or anything, but I think there's a journey here, and for some people that journey ends there, and that's fine. But it is looking for my partner to provide me with the safety and security that actually, if I explored further and if I did the work, I can find it in myself.
Yeah, and I say that, and I know that, from just from knowing you and like what you teach as well, that this is something that you say often, is that you really do have to do like deeper inner work when you're especially when you're creating relationships outside of the cultural narrative, because one of the things that happens when you're creating a relationship inside the cultural narrative is that you have agreement from those around you that what you're doing or how you feeling is how you are supposed to feel or how you
Mm.
should be feeling. And when you're creating it outside of that, it's how you shouldn't feel and how you're not supposed to be. Right? So
Yeah,
you
and you're
do,
dealing with, yeah.
yeah, so you do have to create that inner confidence and self-assuredness and do the inner work to really be able to create the foundation of that.
Yeah, I like to think of it
Yeah.
as basically you're stepping off the echo chamber, you're stepping out of the echo chamber,
Mm-hmm.
and you finally can actually hear your own individual, unique voice.
Oh, I love that. I love that analogy. That's beautiful. All right. Well, when we come back from our break, we're going to go more into what does hierarchy look like, and what does it look like to critically challenge. I love the way that you phrase that. Like, I just want to say, I love the phrase critically challenging hierarchy. Like, I read that on your email and I was like, I'm using this forever. So that is exactly what we're going to talk about when we come back. So everybody stick around and we'll be right back with Roy Graff. We are here with Roy Graff, and we've been talking about solo polyamory and challenging cultural narratives around what relationships can look like. And what I want to go into is this idea of critically challenging and evaluating what hierarchy is, specifically in polyamorous relationships. But I think in, talking to Roy, what we're going to discover is like really critically challenging and evaluating hierarchy even outside of polyamory. So why is it important to critically challenge and evaluate hierarchy in polyamorous relationships?
Okay, so I think I want to go to the point of it's important to challenge it and critically evaluate it in any relationship. I think polyamory is no exception. Monogamy is no exception. We make these assumptions that once we're with a partner that we love and we decide, let's say, to live with them, that they essentially, in a way, we hand them a part of our domain, of the things that as a single person were only mine, right? My time, my energy, parts of my body, right? So ultimately, that can lead, especially if, and we all grew up with some level of insecure attachment from parents who were too distant, too avoidant, too involved in our lives, who didn't have very good boundaries. The point being, we're all messed up to some degree. And we seek in our partner to complete that piece that, we didn't basically get to do the work of completing in ourselves, of finding that security in ourselves. So, and again, and it works for a lot of people, that kind of idea of codependency and enmeshment. It works in monogamy to a certain extent, but it also, I think, prevents people maybe from getting to a level of individuation that helps them really discover much more about themselves, and realize their full potential as a human, as as a conscious self, but when people open up their relationship and move on to non-monogamy or to polyamory, then that level of enmeshment and codependency is usually what puts a spanner in the works. Basically kind of creates the drama and the heartache, because we're so used to having that person essentially feeling like that there is a hierarchy and somehow we are at the top of the hierarchy. That if they go out on a date and if they fall in love with somebody else, that would challenge our position, essentially challenge our safety, because we linked our safety to our position in that relationship, right?
Right.
So
that I just want to like pause there because that's huge.
yeah,
it's like that we linked our position or safety or security to that person or to that relationship. I think that's like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me looking at now, like how much power we hand over, how much of our own power we hand over. And of course, in return, we get power from our partner, and it's this exchange, and we think of it as this beautiful thing. But I prefer to think of a relationship as I am here as an individual, my partner is the individual, and then we, with our energy and with our love, we create this entity in the middle, which is the relationship. And we can feed into it, and we can grow it. But we also know that we can step away and be ourselves and be individual and have our own life and our own, kind of our own personal space. And that if for whatever reason I'm no longer with them, I will be okay. I can still find happiness. I can still be safe. Now, in polyamory, the idea of hierarchy can also have these toxic effects on anybody who comes into an existing relationship, who basically joins either as a secondary partner, or joins as a third to an existing couple to create a triad, for example, right? Now, you're probably familiar with this idea of unicorn hunting and unicorns.
Right.
Maybe explain a little bit that the idea is that um, the unicorn is this like mythical being that's like very rare. Well, actually, it doesn't exist, but let's say very rare. So, so
In this
yeah,
analogy, it's very rare.
yeah, it's not very rare, and a couple typically made up of a man and a woman, but that's not really the point here. The idea is that that third person that they find is equally attracted and wanting to spend time with and interested in both of them equally, right? And therefore, there's no jealousy because everybody's on par and loves everybody the same way.
Right. And it's super
Which
easy
is,
and everything happens perfectly.
yes. And they all want to have sex exactly at the same time and they always have sex together, the three of them, because they all have, their basically their urges is exactly the same at any given moment. Now, yeah, it sounds too good to be true because it is. And it might start off that way in the first few weeks, but eventually people find that they have different speed, different paces, different needs, different desires, which is totally normal.
Mhm.
And most of the time, maybe if one of those connections blossoms and develops, that's great. Let alone like all three dynamics there. And so basically there are. I mean, we're used to saying that in a triad there are four relationships, right, between each couple and then the three of them together. But you can also add again three additional relationships of each one with themselves.
Right.
And
There's a lot going on.
yeah, that's going on. And it has to be done very consciously to observe that the hierarchy creates a situation of real unfairness of the person coming into the dynamic essentially having to accept certain rules and agreements that were made before their time, before they came into it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, because they're entering into a pre-existing relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
So imagine that if you were in a relationship, you started dating somebody and you kind of laid out these rules to them about how they can interact with you, like how much they can kind of love you, and essentially gave them like a time schedule of when you're available for them. That wouldn't really be a very even relationship, and I don't know if the other person would like that very much. But often that's what happens to a third person coming in, joining a couple. So
Right.
that's where hierarchy is, I think, is a problem and needs to be addressed. Now, yeah.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing what you're saying, and like the most common examples that I know as well are, yeah, if you have the hierarchy of already having a pre-existing couple, and then you have secondary partners or tertiary
Mhm.
partners, and so therefore like the first relationship that formed is
Yeah.
the most quote unquote most important
Yeah.
relationship, and or takes precedent over all of the other relationships, and then yeah, the hierarchy of a couple dating and then finding people to date that uh, that they expect this third person to just enter into their relationship with their rules on
Hmm.
their time schedule,
Yeah.
needs, desires.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in
And
both of those cases, sorry, in
yeah,
both cases of whether it's a triad or whether it's a couple that each one is dating but still maintaining that primary label, there tend to be this agreement that that relationship matters more than any other. Which means if you
right.
develop feelings for another person, but your partner is insecure or for whatever reason wants to close the relationship again, right? Then I have given my agreement to stop seeing the other person.
Right. And yeah, and that's kind of like the spin-off of the challenges of having hierarchies, is because yeah, then people are starting to make rules for other people, or like what can or can't happen in a relationship with other people, rather than allowing things to happen organically, or dealing with whatever the insecurity is that started you know originally created that rule, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because I think that having a hierarchy, and I think this is kind of what you're getting at, is like having a hierarchy and maintaining that hierarchy also leaves things unexamined, which is why you need to critically examine and evaluate it.
exactly. Because I mean, that hierarchy in itself is like gives you a sense of security, but I
Right.
think it's a false sense because ultimately, even when you have a hierarchy, your partner can leave you. So, and there's nothing to keep them there really, like legally, or you can't force them to stay. So the hierarchy is largely um, illusory, and it replaces the that you know the it basically um, is a distraction from doing the work of finding your own security, and basically creating agreements that are based on what everybody wants. Agreement that comes from respecting everybody's boundaries when everybody's like eagerly wanting to make that agreement. Because if when you say you have an agreement, but one or more people in the dynamic are reluctantly accepting something just to keep one person happy, then that's a rule. It's not an agreement.
Right.
And something that I've picked up from the Wheel of Consent training with Betty Martin, which is a wonderful practice,
I love that. Yeah.
is around this idea of you have your domain, right? You have your domain, which is what are the things in your life that you have the right to and you have a responsibility for, like your body, your thoughts, your desires, your imagination, your ability to choose, your ability to act, your autonomy and agency. All those things are yours. And that's where the boundaries are important, right? You create boundaries to protect them.
Right.
And in codependent relationships, and when there's this hierarchy, you often like give your partner access to that domain in some ways. And what's really important is to understand what is my domain, to understand that I have a right to say my pleasure, my happiness, all those things, and I'm also responsible for it, but I'm not responsible for anybody else's. And then from that place, building limits, and those limits, and for me personally, how I interact with other people, how much safe I feel in certain environments, they inform the agreements I can make with other people, with other partners.
Right.
And I know that's kind of theoretical, but if we have time, I can give some examples.
Yeah, let's give an example.
So if I feel that, say, my partner bringing somebody home while I'm there and to have sex in the spare room, for example, is making me feel in my body really unsafe. Yeah, I can say that, I can name it, and I can ask my partner not to do that. Ultimately, my partner then has a choice. They can or cannot. I mean, if they own the home equally with me, then they have a choice to also bring people there. But what I can do for myself is maybe not be there, or say, if you're going to be here, if you do that, I can choose to live somewhere else or go away while you're bringing other people here, right? I can really have control over what I do with my body. I can't tell him what to do with his. So,
Right.
but I can obviously say, look, if you're going to bring people home regularly, I might want to live on my own.
Yeah. Do you also find that that is an opportunity to have that growth in yourself and really examine like what is that uncomfortability that's coming up for you?
I do, but I would caution people from like pushing themselves too much, just to go kind of push beyond where they really feel unsafe in their body, just to appease or just to feel like, well, I want to kind of grow, because that kind of growth could, in some cases, re-traumatize people if the source of an insecurity is from trauma. So do it, but do it with a trauma-informed therapist, and take it easy. And you can do that incrementally. It doesn't have to be like, yes, let's just
Oh
like
yeah.
try everything now. Yeah.
Yes, totally. Let me clarify that I mean do the work
Mm.
over time as works for
Yeah.
you.
Well, of course, it's.
Absolutely.
I mean, and we can talk about that. I mean, I'm really big on really getting all the information we can out of our feelings. So
Yeah.
feelings of insecurity, jealousy, they can teach us so much about where we need to do the work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100% beautiful. Okay, so we've been dancing around this topic of couples privilege. And so we haven't actually said the word couples privilege yet, but we are going to go on a break. But when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about couples privilege, and then we're going to wrap up with some of my favorite questions. And then Roy is going to talk about how you can get a hold of him and what he's up to, because I'm sure that you have fallen in love with him over the course of this episode. All right, we are going to be right back. All right, welcome back to the Elizabeth Cunningham Show, Courageously Expanding in Love. And we are still here with the wonderful Roy Graff. And one of the things that we've been kind of dancing around the whole show has been the concept of couples privilege. So tell us a little bit more about what is couples privilege.
Well, when we talk about hierarchy, we're basically saying that somehow there is a priority order, right? And at the top, oftentimes you'd find a couple. And life is kind of organized in our economic system and in the legal system around prioritizing things for couples, and the fact that the relationship model that we grow up with also puts on a pedestal this couples and getting married, etc. Means that a lot of things are geared up for that. So there are privilege everywhere to people who are living as couples compared to people who are single or who maybe want to have a different alternative way of living, maybe with more than two people, three or more. So in a nutshell, that's where the privilege comes in, and just the assumption that just because, for example, the assumption that couples are happier than single people. Yeah. The idea that for couples, there's a tax, for married couples, there's tax breaks and stuff like that. That you can automatically, if you're married and one partner dies, you automatically inherit their money, etc. Which you can't do, say, if you wanted to leave everything to a friend, it's a whole legal thing. So there's a bunch of those things, and I have a whole article on my website that talks about couples privilege if people are interested to kind of go a bit deeper into it. But when it comes to polyamory, we're not any different. People who who kind of practice polyamory often still adopt a lot of the symbolism around being in a couple, and they often do that also to fit in society. So take all the way from having to hide the fact that they're polyamorous, so presenting as monogamous even though they have other partners, and then those partners sometimes can't be seen with their partner in public because maybe it's a small town or whatever, and they people will ask questions, right? So they can only see each other in private. They can never come with them to public events or work events, etc. So again, there's a privilege there. But also, if they are relatively open, there's still certain things, like for example, they might be open, but their family doesn't accept that, and the family will only see them with their primary partner. Yeah, I see those stories as well.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that you hit a lot of like main points, but I think the list could really go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Because we do have this, cultural narrative of like you're either single or you're in a couple. And so, think about all of the times in our lives where, you want to bring someone who's special to you, wherever that may be. But then this idea of, I think one of the ones that I hear that you brought up is I wish that I could have more of my partners with me in public, especially people who are in small towns, where everybody knows everybody. And then there's you don't want to, if you're a really private person, maybe you don't care what people think, but you also don't want to answer a lot of questions, or like, you don't know what people will say or do. And, I've also had people who've shared that they've had either lost their job or had the threat of losing their job for things that they've been doing in their romantic relationships, like having
Yeah.
multiple romantic relationships, and which
Yeah.
is just, I think, a little bizarre, but it's also in line with this idea of couples privilege, right?
Yes, and I just want to add one more thing, which is the emotional privilege of having somebody to co-regulate with, right? It's like if I'm feeling emotionally disturbed, if I need, and needy, I've got my partner, no problem, right? I've got somebody there to come and give me a hug and hold me, and we take it for granted.
Mm.
But people who live, single people or solo polyamorous people don't always have that, and you learn to regulate yourself a lot more, which ultimately I think also makes you a better partner because you're with you choose to be with somebody because you really want to be there with them, not because they provide a utility to you, like emotional regulation or any other kind of like benefit. That's not the reason I'm with my partners.
Yeah,
I'm with
no,
them because I love them and I enjoy spending time with them. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that that's an amazing point. And I think that, you've hit on that a couple of different times in this episode, just in different ways, where it's being able to have that confidence, that assuredness, that emotional regulation, where you really can choose the relationships that you want. And I use the word choice, meaning like choosing it freely, right? Like not feeling like
Exactly.
a have to, like, oh,
Yeah.
I need to, where
Well,
it's just
just
like,
knowing, yeah, just
right.
knowing you can choose. I mean, for a lot of
Yeah.
people, growing up in the world that we do, like we don't even know we have that choice.
Yeah.
I mean, heck,
Beautiful.
I didn't know I had that choice until I was 40 plus, so.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of the lucky ones who realized, who kind of came to this a little bit earlier. But yeah, but there are a lot of people who, yeah, you don't discover that until later in life, which I think that, 40 plus is still like fairly young.
Yeah, I'm not, no complaints. I made the most of the time that after I discovered it, and I'm very happy that I did. And it
Yeah.
is young, but but also I was in unhappy or ultimately unhappy relationships because they weren't the right fit for me, and I didn't know that.
Mhm.
And I think could have saved a lot of heartache to me and my partners at the time, if I
Yeah.
knew.
Well, and in that, I really thank you for coming on the show today. And I really hope that people who have listened today have heard something for themselves. And I'm going to ask you our ending questions here. And the first one is, what does love mean to you?
That's such a big question. You want me to answer it in 1 minute or less, right?
Yeah, 30 seconds, go.
Yeah. Love is just, I don't know, wholeness, peace, and it's, um, and it's, yeah, it starts with me. So it starts with like self-love and bringing people into this place of calmness and wholeness with me.
I love that. What do you hope that people take away from our show today? If you could give them one golden nugget, what would it be?
I think it is to work on being uh, like of having the ability to self-regulate, to be comfortable in your own skin for yourself, to know that you can be happy on your own, and then it's much easier to be happier also with other people.
Beautiful. All right. And so how can people get a hold of you? What are you up to? I like I said, I'm sure that people have fallen in love with you and are like, Roy Graff, where can I find him? What is he doing? How can I get involved?
Well, I live in London, England. I travel around Europe a little bit, but most of my followers are in the US, except that I don't have plans to travel there just now. But anyway, I'm training to be a fully accredited psychotherapist, and I'm seeing clients at the moment. Most of my work is coaching individuals, couples, and more. I don't only work with people who want to explore polyamory. I work with monogamous people as well. I think again the core is to have conscious and autonomous relationships. They can look very differently, but the core is that you feel that you are autonomous, that you are an individual, and from that place of strength, then you can basically then build healthy relationships. So that's basically the core of my work. I work out individually. I also work with group coaching programs. So I have a program called the Coaching Club, which meets on Saturdays, where we do some peer support as well. And that's a very accessible way to start. And I'm on Instagram at Open Relating. My website is openrelating.love, and there's a blog there with a lot of more kind of in-depth articles, as well as a lot of my videos and workshops. And I'm also on Twitter if that's your kink. Also open relating. Yeah.
Beautiful. Twitter, if that's your kink. All right. And all of that, the links to find Roy are in the show notes. So if you are currently watching live, they're in the show notes. If you are watching later on, they're in the show notes. So make sure that you go and check out Roy. And if he really speaks to your heart, definitely reach out to him. Roy, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for staying up late so that you can talk to me and my audience. And I so appreciate you. And I really do hope that our listeners have really gotten the sense of freedom and autonomy that you've spoken to.
Thanks so much. I'm actually really energized now. I don't want to go to sleep.
All right. Well, beautiful. Well, thank you everyone for listening, watching, whatever platform that you're on. Make sure that if you loved this show, that you check us out every week. We have a new episode every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. And if this is something that you think other people resonate, please share. You have been listening to The Elizabeth Cunningham Show, courageously expanding love with me, Elizabeth Cunningham.
Tune in live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on transformationtalkradio.com, where we shed light on relationships, sex, love, and the ways we wish we could be, but never thought were possible. Learn to love yourself and create the relationships you want. Connect with me at ElizabethAnnCunningham.com. That's ElizabethAnnCunningham.com.